We've come to the center of the mandala, and in the center of the mandala is the Buddha Vairocana, the Buddha in the middle. He holds a wheel of the Buddhist teachings, which are going to be set in motion. So you've got to imagine, it's hard when a static image. You've got to imagine that wheel is turning, and it's like the sun. Vairocana means illuminator. And at the center of the mandala of the Buddhas, this great sort of circle of the Buddhas, is in a way openness, open space. Probably no one's gone into this with you on this particular meditation challenge, but each of the Buddhas has a female form as well as a male form. Ooh, interesting. That can be meditation challenge number 2 next year. But yeah, so Vairocana's female kind of counterpart is queen. Is known as the Queen of Space, Akasha Dharteshvari, the Queen of Space. So you've come into the middle of the sort of these archetypal Buddha figures, and in the middle, one might expect to find something like quite concrete or very rich or elaborate, but what one finds is open space. The principle really of receptivity. And in a way, this is a very, very essential principle for all the other areas or the system of meditation that we've been looking at during the past 5 weeks. Without openness and without receptivity, none of the other areas are possible. So you've been looking at the different, for this evening, it's not traditional, but I might call them the different moods of meditation. You can look at them as a kind of path, but you can also look at them as the kind of dynamics or mood that's found within all the meditations. And all of the other sort of elements of this meditation system, of this, all the other sort of moods of meditation that you've been looking at in the past 5 weeks, at the heart of them is receptivity. So, for example, with integration, you can't really integrate your mind. Sort of going back, if you can remember all those weeks ago, I think it was Padma Vajra, wasn't it? Was looking at integration with you. And you know, that he was saying, well, there's all these different competing parts of yourself that, you know, in one situation you're one person, in another situation you're another person. And, you know, the person who goes to bed with a fully intending to meditate the next morning wakes up and a different self is in operation. Well, you need receptivity and openness to your actual experience to be able to see that that's the dynamic that's happening. If you're not open to what's actually happening in your experience, those different cells will just take over. But in a way, half the battle is won if you actually notice, if you're actually receptive to the fact that the person who went to bed is a different person to the one who woke up in the morning. And you can see for yourself, oh, look, I'm experiencing resistance to meditation. Last night, I really had a strong intention. This morning, the duvet seems like it has a greater weight. It's much more comfortable than I imagined it to be last night. And I'm experiencing some resistance. So you've got to know what's actually going on in your experience to be able to work with it and to be able to cultivate integration. You've got to see the different selves in operation. You've got to notice that when you're at work with your colleagues, you are telling jokes that you wouldn't normally tell at a Buddhist center. Or when you're, with your family, I become unusually quiet sometimes. It's quite a phenomenon to notice. Suddenly the shy personality comes up. So you've got to notice that that's actually what's in operation. Oh, I haven't said anything while. I haven't brought myself in, or I haven't stopped talking in quite a while. Maybe someone else has something to say. So that, yeah, you need receptivity in order to see what's in operation in each moment, in order to integrate it. The same with positive emotion. You need to actually know what you're feeling in order to cultivate positive emotion. So I remember this video that they made of a very, very early retreat, going back, in the arc of the Buddhist order, and the very, very early retreat in the order. And in those days, different Buddhist teachers were invited from all different Buddhist traditions, were invited to teach on this retreat. And there was an interview with one of them who was a Zen practitioner, very, very good meditation teacher. And he was talking about meditation, and he said, well, when you meditate, you realize the sort of oneness of experience. And as he was talking, he thought, oh, yeah, you could really get into this mood. You could just feel like everything comes together and all experiences are one. And you can see he's really, really got somewhere in meditation. The sort of feeling comes from him. And then it cuts to Sangharakshita, who says, well, when you start to to meditate, and then there's this little pause, he says, you realize just how angry you really are. And a friend of mine, of ours, who Nagabodhi wrote a very good book about Sangharakshita, and he said he wrote to Sangharakshita after that retreat, and he said, some people offer a path to the sun, but you offer a path to the moon and the stars, the sun, and all the darkness in between. Like the whole experience. You've got to be aware of the whole experience. And sometimes in meditation, that's what happens, is you just realize how annoyed you are at everything, how grumpy, angry, disappointed, anxious, all the rest of it, all these kind of hosts of things that you've been desperate to avoid for so many years all come up. And it's those emotions that hold the energy that can be transformed. How wonderful to know just how lonely you are. That's what I've sometimes realized. I remember this meditation and just realizing the depths of my own loneliness. And as I realized the depths of my own loneliness, I knew I was free, because I knew that I'd been avoiding that loneliness for so long that if I could just face it, all my decisions, my sort of positive decisions, would be made on the basis of being in touch with that and not just trying to avoid it. Almost by experiencing it, I knew it was okay. And once more, I knew that all beings experience that. So again, if we're just receptive not to what we should be feeling, but what we are feeling, then the whole world opens up, and the whole possibility of cultivating positive mental states is just there. It's just there. You don't even need to kind of push something into being. It's just there. When I realised just how lonely I was, I knew that that was a fundamental human experience, and that I wasn't alone in my loneliness, if you see what I mean. So, and out of that, a great feeling of love and compassion opened for all beings. So if we want to develop positive emotion, we have to know what we're actually experiencing and not what we just should be feeling. We have to know what our emotions actually are, not what our emotions should be. So we have to see the sun, the moon, the stars, the whole night sky, the whole blue sky in operation. And then we came to letting go. And Maitrinara was talking about creating stories, these narratives that we have about our lives, and letting those stories go. What if we could drop those stories? Again, we need to have receptivities to know exactly what stories we're telling ourselves. That's the first step to knowing whether they're actually true, is to know what stories are actually in operation here. In a way, it's a kind of piece of magic to know that moment when you there's a story in operation. it's cranking itself up. My story is often about poor me, and no one cares what I think or feel. Ooh, it just starts coming, and then I start believing it, and then it's cranking up, and I think, ooh, this is just a story. And then the whole thing is like a ghost that's been following us around and just dissipates. Also, I live in a community that know me well, and they know that when I get into that mood, they start singing. This is really bad, actually, but they start singing, she was despised, rejected, despised, rejected of women. It's quite hard to hold the story that you're despised and rejected when someone's teasing you about it and singing in the kitchen at the same time. So one has to be aware of one's little stories that one tells oneself, and just be open to them. And maybe if one has a little sense of humour, it does help. And then last week we looked at opening up, glimpsing the possibility of a creative response, and seeing where the possibilities are, for example, for true human value and true beauty. Well, again, one has to be receptive to one's whole experience to see where those glimmerings are, to see where there is just a touch of magic. I was listening to Surya Gupta's talk from last week. She was describing going to a ballet teacher's house in actually probably not far from where our new retreat centre is, because she said it was near Welwyn Garden City. And she was eating cucumber sandwiches without crusts. Like, who eats cucumber sandwiches without crust? But one, you know, in a way it's quite an ordinary thing, a sandwich. But she was receptive to enough to know that somehow that sandwich was more than a sandwich. It represented something else, something which was saying you are valued enough to make a sandwich which has the crusts cut off. But you have to be receptive for those moments, because otherwise you're just going to wolf the sandwich down and then no one knows any better. So this whole principle of receptivity is saying, be open, notice, see what's happening, see what's going on, what's in operation here. There's a line from a Buddhist teaching I particularly like, where in meditation, the great teacher Yeshe Sogyal, she says, whatever experiences arise, just let them be. It's quite an interesting phrase. Whatever experiences arise, just let them be and see what emerges from them. And it goes against this tendency to try and force having a particular experience, particularly in meditation, by an effort of will. It's very easy to come to meditation and think I must have a good kind of Buddhist experience, whatever that is. You know, you've got an image of a very refined, calm Buddhist monk. And one can feel quite far away from being a calm, refined Buddhist monk. But you think, oh, you know, I'm doing the mindfulness of breathing. I must be mindful. And I'm doing the metta bhavana. I must be loving. And I want a different experience. So I'm going to have that different experience. I'm going to squeeze it out of me. There was someone in the meditation class on Monday who was saying, well, he can get into this dichotomy of like either no meditation or 2 hours. And you're like, look, there's something in between, I'm sure, of those two things. And there's a kind of pushing. He was recognizing in himself, a kind of pushing to have it all or nothing. And in that dynamic of mind, we can exert the wrong sort of effort to pull out an experience on top of our existing being. Sangharaj just said it's like you're trying to reach into the ground and pull a fully formed flower from the earth. And I don't know much about gardening, it has to be said. This is where I often use gardening metaphors, and I realise my limitation on this point. So ask Kayla and Sangadarani. She's just been on a gardening retreat. But yeah, you can feel, and Stephanie actually as well, she's here. but yeah, you can't decide, well, I want a daffodil, so I'm just going to reach into the earth and pull out a daffodil from a bulb. It just doesn't work like that. You have to let the flower emerge. You give the flower space and openness. You give it a subtle responsiveness, interest, encouragement, water, sun, air, the right soil, a little bit of talking to, and slowly and gently, in all the right conditions, that daffodil will emerge. And maybe it's more surprising in its fullness if you let it emerge than if you had decided from the beginning what that daffodil was going to look like and you pulled it fully formed from the earth. It would be a disaster if all our experience conformed to what we thought it should be. It would be a disaster. It would be a very limited, tight universe. But luckily for us, that's not the way it works. You put in the conditions, something emerges that's greater even than we could have possibly imagined. And this principle of receptivity is a kind of, it's almost like a skill or a muscle that we need to flex, that we need to encourage. It goes so much against the grain of a modern consumerist society. One shouldn't always be critical of a modern consumerist society because we live, quite comfortable lives on the basis of it. But there is something where we're given an expectation that if we want something, we should immediately have it. And the whole sort of slow play practice of growth is put aside for immediate gratification. So to allow receptivity is quite a radical act in a productive society based on immediate gratification. And in a way, it's offering a different dynamic. Instead of the dynamic of I want something and I will have it immediately, it offers the dynamic of wait. Just wait and let the experience come to you in its fullness. Start by seeing the world and seeing experience as coming from its own side, not just forcing it into existence. So we, before the tea break, we did a meditation without doing a meditation. We're just allowing experience to come to us. What did anyone notice? Did anyone notice anything when they did that? Oh, yeah.
I noticed it took me longer than I expected to come to a point where I was realizing my experience. There's so much debris needed to settle for a lot longer than I realized.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not as easy as you think it is to just be present to your experience, but in a way you can be present to the experience of a very busy mind, but that's part of it as well. Just noticing, be present to over time my mind is doing a different process, it's settling. Yeah.
I noticed the need to do something.
Oh yeah, okay, the need to do something, yeah. So there's that little urge, isn't there? So one practice you can do with this particular sort of mode of meditation of receptivity is do a practice called just doing nothing, which means just doing nothing. So you can, not even in meditation posture, but just sit in a chair and do nothing. And it's almost excruciating because the desire to do something is so strong. But it's a very useful practice.
Yeah. I was very physically uncomfortable, really hot, and I just really needed to move. It was weird, but I felt very emotionally peaceful. So there was these two things that happened at the same time that were very different.
Great, great. So you can notice as well that when you're just with your experience, you can notice there's a texture to it. It's never completely one thing. So you can feel like really hot and at peace. You can also have a texture of experience where you feel like really upset and at peace at the same time. Or there's different things going on. It's a bit like the sky in January and February in the UK. Particularly I live in Wales. You can think that's a grey sky, but actually the sky is never just grey. If you look at it, there's a whole world in there, a whole texture of sky, which does help the January blues, the winter blues. Yeah. Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
It just felt really nice.
It just feels really nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was quite nice to not have to it was quite nice to not think about the full stage of the breathing or whatever and be able to rest do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good because you didn't have to think about it. It's, it can feel quite a relief because there's always this pressure to sort of have an experience or to be productive in a particular way. But actually, we can go into a new mode of being, which is just to be open to our experience. And when we do that, it can feel like a massive relief. Like all this pressure that we've had to be someone, to do something, can be dropped, even for a moment or two, even for 10 minutes a day, to just be, to just have one's experience as it is. This is a central shift in a movement of mind that happens in Buddhist meditation and in Buddhism in general. What Buddhism says is that we tend to grasp our experience rather than experiencing it. We tend to grasp after particular experiences and push other experiences away. So then it sets up this tension of mind to always have a particular experience and not to have another experience. It affects the way that we are in the world. So in Buddhism, they really put an emphasis on that all the objects of experience are objects of the mind. So all the experience that we have is through the filter of our own mind. So, for example, if I look at this shrine, I'm never just looking at the shrine. Well, first of all, I've categorized it as a shrine. So you've got this golden Buddha figure, this Buddha Rupa, and I'm looking at that. There's the Buddha Rupa itself. There's my eye, the eye organ. Then there's the mind that interprets the information coming from my eye, the organ of the eye. There's a mind that interprets that information, puts it the right way up, and then a mental state that says what it is. So I don't really know what that Buddha figure is in itself. What I know is what my mind tells me about it. So for example, and there's a whole host of the mind that is always categorizing, a whole host of mental states that's always categorizing, that's always interpreting, that's always making sense of the experience coming into my sense organs. So, for example, that one, I've actually got a very special affinity to that particular Buddha figure because that was the Buddha figure in the original South London Buddhist Centre in Clapham when I was 17. So that is the first. It's the only bit of the centre that's sort of remained the same, apart from myself and Amrit Pushpa. But it's the original Buddha figure that I meditated. The first sort of Buddha figure I really had a relationship to as a Buddha figure and not just an ornament. I've got a category of it, so then I've got a feeling about it, so immediately before I even think about it, I've got a feeling of warmth. I notice I have a slight protective sort of relationship with that figure, because I don't want anyone to sell it or throw it away or drop it on its head or something. And I know I like it. I've got an attraction to it. It reminds me of something. It gives me a feeling of sort of safety and familiarity in some way. I didn't actually know they were going to put it on the shrine this evening, but it's quite handy that it's there, because actually I do have quite a lot going on in my mind about that particular Buddha figure. But that's what we're doing all the time. I also say it's a Buddha figure. I don't see it as an ornament. I see it as something that represents something much, much bigger to me in my mind. It represents, for example, my own potential and your potential. It reminds me of it's got its own quality. It's got a peaceful quality. It's got an upright quality. It embodies a sort of feeling of calm and also energy. It reminds me of the historical Buddha and all the stories that I know about the historical Buddha. So everything that we're experiencing all the time is really a mental state. It's a mental picture of things. It's experiences through the mind. So the Buddha said, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. And it's really hard to take that on. I mean, it's basically philosophy 101. If I'm leading a study group at our retreat centre, I usually draw a diagram, which is the classic diagram and someone always says, I remember studying this in my philosophy, at school, my philosophy lesson at school. But it's classic philosophy sort of 101, is that actually you don't know what things are in themselves. What you know is what you think about them. What's actually happening in your mind. They're never really objects. All objects of experience are actually objects of perception. They're what's happening in your mind. And the mind exerts a sort of pressure on our experience as it arises to have what we want and to avoid what we don't want. It's a very useful sort of survival skill, if you like, because it's very immediate and it means we can avoid danger and have more safety. But it kind of overdoes its own job, that reflex of the mind, if you see what I mean. And it means that what we do in all our experience is we're categorizing it, grasping after some experience and avoiding other experience. And it puts a pressure on every perceptual situation. It puts a pressure on us, on our mind, to have what we want and to avoid what we don't want. So this kind of dynamic, if you like, of meditation, which is openness and receptivity, undoes that, because it allows experience to come in as it is. Because what also happens, as we're filtering everything through our mind, we also, and categorizing it and, grasping after some and avoiding others, we also just completely ignore whole swathes of our experience. We don't notice a lot of what is actually happening in our experience. We're sort of categorizing it, even is sort of below the level of thought. So it's not categorizing it as a kind of mental exercise, but below the level of thought, we're just immediately pushing aside and ignoring whole swathes of our experience. So receptivity is trying to undo that dynamic by allowing all experience to come to us in all its fullness, without that dynamic of avoiding some experience and grasping after other experience. And then what happens is we allow ourselves to be surprised, and a little bit of magic arises. So there's this really interesting story, quite a simple story from the life of the Buddha, where it's really hard to say it without saying it in this particular way, but bahir of the bark garment. I always want to say bark garment. Bahia of the bark garment, which is a kind of old translation of it. It basically means we think he was wearing clothes made out of bark, probably some sort of hemp, or no, that's not a bark, is it? It's a leaf. Maybe, I don't know. I think, why am I getting into the nature of the whole clothing? I think I'm on dodgy ground, but there is a certain material made out of birch bark or something. Anyway, it wasn't like that. It was the ancient Indian equivalent of the bark garment. Anyway, he was wearing sort of funny clothing. And he came to see the Buddha. And the Buddha gave him this teaching. He said, this direct teaching. He said, in the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the thought, only the thought. So it's a very, very simple teaching. In the seen, only the seen. In the thought, only the thought. In the heard, only the heard. So he said this, and Bahia got it. Now, unfortunately, the next episode in the story is that they was killed by a cow. Which it's actually quite a big danger in India because they do wander about quite a lot. Anyway, or in Wales, in fact. I was a bit nervous about cows around our place after this story, but he was killed by a cow. And the monks came to him and said, well, Bahia's just got killed by a cow. You gave him that teaching, and then, a few minutes later, he was killed. And the Buddha said, no, don't worry about it. He had complete freedom of mind, and he was totally liberated. He'd reached enlightenment just before he died. So it's quite a thing to say, because it's quite a simple teaching. And maybe someone is just suddenly enlightened here. Is anyone just suddenly enlightened? Oh, that's a shame. Ask for your money back. Yeah, but he had this freedom of mind. That's the way the Buddha put it. He had a freedom of mind. And I've often wondered, well, what's the relationship between that teaching, in the seen, only the seen, in the heard, only the heard, the thought, only the thought? What's the relationship between that and a freedom of mind? Well, he was free from any other expectation of experience. He was free from that whole dynamic of pushing and grasping. And free from that sort of pressure to have one particular experience over another experience. And in a way, it just liberated. The whole mind was there in its fullness. I sort of have this imagining of Bahia at that moment. He gets this teaching. There's a whole freeness of mind. And yes, he dies not long after that experience. But he was already free, and death or no death had no, it was like the job was done in a way. The liberation of mind had happened. So the practice that goes with this particular sort of mode of meditation is just to sit. Just allow yourself to just sit and be with whatever experiences arise. The whole mandala of experience. Like Vairocana the Buddha, we sit in the mandala of experience and then we just open up and we see what happens and we take that up as a practice. And what starts to happen is a particular process. So the first part of that process is that we see ourselves in all our fullness. We see the whole kind of mandala of emotions that arises within ourselves, the whole mandala of thoughts, the whole mandala of bodily sensations. There's so many ways in which I could talk about this, but one experience I might talk about is having migraine. So I've had migraine since I was a child. I used to be a lot iller with them actually as a child than I am now. And I taught myself something as a child, which is I taught myself that when there was that degree of pain, my instinct was to avoid it and tense up around it. But if I just relaxed and opened myself to the pain, then there was something much more that would emerge than just the pain. So interestingly, I used to imagine then that the pain had a particular channel around my body, and I used to imagine, this was very, very small actually, I imagined it as a great big snake. And I later found out that if I'd have drawn that snake on my body, it would have been perfectly the liver channel in Chinese medicine. Anyway, I didn't know that because no one told me, and I was about 5. So, and I didn't have a pen to actually draw it on me. But I remember that, and I remember, well, if you just relax into the pain, it's like that. But there's also a lot of the body that isn't affected as well. Again, there's a whole texture of experience that sometimes can be quite contradictory. So instead of bracing up around the pain, I learned that there's actually much, much more going on. There's a lot more texture to experience. And much more to me. I also did this thing with a friend. For some reason, we were talking about something, and I said, well, instead of writing, there's this thing of writing a gratitude diary. I won't go into the reasons, but I said to her, why don't you write a diary of when you feel vulnerable? She had such an aversion to feeling vulnerable. I said, just make a note of it and then write it down in the diary and we'll compare notes. Actually, she thought it was a terrible idea and she didn't do it. But I thought it was a great idea and I did it. And I really realised that I actually learned loads from that exercise. And I was actually going to India at the time. And actually what I realised is there's a tendency in myself to, in an uncomfortable experience, to brace. And I'm a bit of a scrapper, So I sort of tussle and wrestle with my experience. But actually what it's covering up is vulnerability. So I was going to India and doing quite a bit of quite a full program of meeting people and giving talks and being in meetings. And one can feel quite vulnerable when one is in a new culture. I don't know if some of you experience that, but when you're in a new culture, you don't really know how things go. You're really worried about offending people all the time, and everything is a bit new. You have to work out all the new systems, like even going to the toilet is a new system in India. It wasn't entirely unfamiliar to me, but what I realised that actually underneath this kind of bracing against experience was just vulnerability. And once I experienced the vulnerability, just was open to that, it just all flowed, that, okay, so you're just vulnerable, that's all it is. You don't have to do anything about it. So we open up to ourselves, and then we sort of see that there's a possibility also within all of that experience. There's something quite sweet and creative that can emerge. That actually we don't have to be defined about bracing against certain experience and craving after other experience. That actually there's a whole fullness there. There's vulnerability, but then there's also connection and metta and love. So there's ourselves. We've become much, much more open to this full experience of ourselves in all our heights and all our depths. The love that arises, the wisdom, the clarity, but also the vulnerability or the loneliness or the pain. And we have the same process with others. If we're completely receptive to others, we move away from this dynamic of thinking we know who people are. It's a very painful thing. We sort of meet someone and you think well, this is this so-and-so person and I've got an idea about them. And then we sort of close off from each other in a particular way. But what if we had beginner's mind, what's something called beginner's mind in relation to other people? That every time, even when you meet a good friend, an old friend, they're totally new and full of surprises. And then when you say, how are you? And they say you're fine. And instead of sort of just dismissing that, you can sort of take them in and see, well, what does fine mean to this great unknown mystery of a person? It's a wonderful experience. Everyone's a mystery every single time you meet them, even in every moment. Even during the meeting, they might start from one state and then they finish off in another state. There's this glorious openness of humanity in front of you, and none of it is known and none of it is pinned down. And we can do the same thing with our environment, you know, instead of just categorizing it and ignoring it and walking on by. We can be open to how things are in our environment, and everything becomes new. I remember when we've got, in our place in Wales, we've got a driveway, and a driveway is usually a place on the way to somewhere else. But I had an operation and I couldn't walk very far, but I had to have a little walk every day. So my little walk every day was just to the end of the drive and back. And that drive came completely alive. I realised that it had like these amazing trees. It has all these roots. Over time, I realised we've actually got a bluebell wood in that drive. Who knew? I didn't, because I never looked to the left. And I remember it sort of opened up a world to me of... I remember I was much more open to things as a child. And I went on this... I had a kind of whole mythic landscape around Tooting and Streatham, where I went to school. I wouldn't think that Streatham is a mythic landscape, but it is. And I was on a storytelling course, and he said a storyteller has to have a mythic centre. And I thought, well, they all grew up in places like Dartmoor. So I was thinking, well, where's mine? Anyway, so I said as I went to sleep, please may I be shown my mythic centre in my dreams. So I went to sleep. You can do this tonight. Just see what comes up. I want to be shown my mythic centre. So I had that intention and I went to sleep. And in my dream, there was a young woman who was, in my dream, my guru. She said, I'll show you your mythic centre. So I was like, great, where is it? And she took me to a car park in Streatham. But that car park in Streatham is a holy place, I tell you. It was the place where my junior school walked to go to the senior school for lunch. It was also, Streatham perhaps still is quite renowned for its activities at night. And it was also a place where people will go for their nighttime activities and leave evidence. I won't go into it. So I was like, in this dream, I was thinking, oh no. But actually, strangely, it was quite a joyful place because for me, I was going for my lunchtime. So, you know, and we used to play and count the condoms. It was terrible. I think we really knew what the condoms were. This is a very inauspicious space, is my mythic centre. And then I found out, I looked it up, I thought, well, there must be something to this. I looked it up, and actually Streatham High Road was a Roman road. So there you go. So I think it was the site of an ancient temple. But in a way, I thought, no, don't undermine it, because actually what happens is there can be, in my childhood, that whole landscape, that familiar landscape, had its own journey. So it wasn't just a car park, it was the journey to lunchtime and having a break. And it was me and my friends doing something silly and naughty that we didn't really know what it meant, which was counting the condoms, honestly. So where am I going with this? I don't know. But I just remember that richness of childhood. And I can remember all those sights from my junior school on the way to the senior school. And I can remember the whole joy of them, and that each had its own rich significance. And I remember exactly where the forget-me-nots grew, because I remember how blue they were, just like so blue like the sky. And in my adulthood, I'd like to keep that sense of a mythic landscape, you know, that there's that joyful walk just down Effra Parade, and you see the prayer flags coming into view, and that expectation of seeing your friends, and that everything has a meaning and a richness and an aliveness to it. And if we're open to things in that way, it's not just that receptivity is passive. It's not just an openness to experience that's to a dead universe. It's actually an openness to an experience that's an alive universe, We are alive, other people are alive, the environment is alive from its own side, not just from how we categorize it and the pushes and pulls we have in relation to it. And within that openness and experience, there are things of great beauty and goodness and truth and wonder, if only we were alive to it. William Blake saw an angel in Peckham. And there is absolutely no reason that I can think of why we shouldn't see angels in Peckham. None at all. In fact, where there's a poet near where I live in Wales called Henry Vaughan, and he said, it used to be that under every tree was an angel talking to a man. Not just a man as in, but mankind, a person. And I think there is still under every tree an angel talking to a person, if only we were open to it. There are things of great import that happen. There are things of great import that happen here, great wonders and joyfulness, if only we're receptive to them, that we deeply, deeply respond to. So part of receptivity is about not only seeing our experience in its fullness, but responding to what we really value, what's good and true and beautiful and wonderful in that experience. And I can't tell you what those things will be. You have to discover it for yourself. You know, whether it's a forget-me-not or a Tibetan prayer flag or coming in here and meeting people that you might even know, but as if you were meeting them for the first time. This is what we're creating here in this Buddhist community. So going back to Vairocana, there's a legend about Vairocana, which is he has this magical tower. And when you enter into the magical tower, you see multiple towers reflected in each other. And there's a story about someone who goes into this tower, and in the tower, he sees the whole of humanity. And he sees all the times when people respond to goodness and truth and beauty. He sees all the positive actions of all beings. And every moment of turning towards what's good, true and beautiful. And he sees the whole thing in a kind of vision. He sees you, he sees me, he sees all of us here. Turning towards meditation, opening up to ourselves, to each other, to the environment, to reality itself. And he's filled with joy because it was all there all the time, all those moments of truth and goodness. And for the first time, he's open to those experiences, but he sees everyone's experience of that. He sees the whole thing. He sees the whole of reality in a great sort of flush. And his whole body is just filled with bliss as he sees the whole picture of everything that arises for everyone in all time. And it's utterly, utterly good, which is quite an experience. So Vairocana stands in the centre of the mandala and he sees the whole thing. So that's what happens when we're receptive. We're not neutral or passive. But we see the love and the wisdom and the energy that runs through everything. And we respond very deeply to that.